Last week, I gave a sermon entitled As If, in which I talked about seeing things not just as they are, but with all their possibilities. Seeing the world, for example, not just as it is now, but as it could be, and then working to make as if into is. Today, I want to do something a little different. With the change of one letter, I want to talk about another concept that's very important, and that's as is. If you've ever gone to the discount section of a department store or an outlet store for factory rejects or even any thrift shop or garage sale, you are probably, no doubt, familiar with this label. As is basically means we're selling this, even though it has flaws. We're not necessarily going to tell you what they are. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself. But fair warning, it's a little uneven, a bit irregular. Maybe if there's a tear here or a hole there, or it's got a spot or two that won't come out with cleaning. Do you want it? Take it. But don't come back complaining. We gave you fair warning. This label should be on every human being, don't you think? Because every person you'll ever meet, every person you'll ever know, every person you'll ever look up to is from the discount section. Honest. Everyone is slightly irregular, and sometimes not so slightly. They don't come with a visible as-is label hanging from their neck, but they should. There's a book whose title I just love, Everybody's Normal Till You Get to Know Them. Everybody's normal till you get to know them. And I think that's just the best advice for getting married, making friends, having kids, finding a church, calling a minister. If you found someone who seems perfectly normal, rest assured you just don't know them well enough yet. It's like the movie with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt called As Good as It Gets. The person Helen Hunt plays is seeing Jack Nicholson, who can be nice, but is also extremely rude and obsessive compulsive and a number of other things. And she says to her mother, I just want a normal boyfriend. And her mom says, oh, everyone wants one of those, dear. There's no such thing. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm one of those people who generally likes to check out the as-is section in any store. And that's because often the flaw in the product available is fairly minor. Like the dent you're going to put on your new car eventually anyway, so you might as well dent it now and get it over with. I like that. A t-shirt with one sleeve slightly longer than another. A tie with a little run in the back. A lacquered table with a crack in the coating, but a little black magic marker will cover it up well enough. I like these buys because I feel the flaws are more than compensated for by the bargain price. Also, I kind of feel I'm doing my part to lessen what's going to otherwise go into landfills, so it's sort of my own version of recycling. The only trouble is, the flaw you thought you saw when you picked up your merchandise, the flaw about which you said, oh, this isn't so bad, it's worth it for the discount I'm getting. Sometimes that's not the real flaw. You may come to discover that the irregularities in what you bought are different from the ones you first saw when you decided to take it home. And then, of course, it's too late to take it back. The same is true in every relationship. Seeing a few flaws in someone doesn't necessarily mean you've seen them all. Just like the merchandise in the discount aisle, you may see a little stain and think, oh, this isn't so bad. It's worth the money I'm saving, only to take your product home and find that it's ripped too, and it bleeds in the wash. Every person you ever get to know is just like that. The irregularities you see at first may pale in comparison to the ones you'll discover later on. But you know what? The same is true of you. You yourself are from the discount section. You are somewhat irregular, maybe more than a little irregular. Now, your irregularities may be different from some other folks, and you may even convince yourself that your irregularities are rather minor compared to a lot of other people's. But it's all a matter of perspective, isn't it? Rest assured, there are some who would consider your flaws much worse than you consider theirs. One of the best ideas I ever heard for a spiritual discipline that you can do every day, and it just takes a few seconds. Well, would you like a brief spiritual exercise you can do every day? Okay, here it is. Every morning, when you get up, look in the mirror and say to yourself, "You're no bargain either." I think that's a wonderful spiritual discipline that doubles as your first laugh for the day. Now, one of the problems I have with this subject of as is the relationship between accepting someone else's as is and accepting myself as is. For example, I sometimes find it extremely difficult to accept someone as is if I think they're stubborn, pig-headed, arrogant, self-righteous, any one of those. I just hate that. And one of the reasons I hate that is that I am stubborn, pig-headed, arrogant, and self-righteous. Maybe on different issues than they are, but it's the same basic flaws that I can't stand in others. And if that weren't bad enough, I think to myself, what's wrong with me that I can't just accept everyone as is? I mean, as a good you, I'm supposed to embody you values, like affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Why can't I do that? But then I think, if I'm going to practice accepting people as is, maybe I need to start right here to accept myself as is. That is, accept myself as a person who can't seem to accept other people as is. That's part of my as is. In effect, I'm saying, I have trouble accepting you as you are, and I have trouble accepting the fact that I have trouble accepting who you are. But I don't have to have trouble accepting the fact that I have trouble accepting the fact that I have trouble accepting who you are. If you don't get a nervous breakdown with that, I'm not sure what will do it. But anyway, and then I think about what they say in AA, fake it till you make it. That is, if you can't quite get there, act as if you could, as I said last week. And then see if that doesn't help you over the hump. So when I find myself unable to accept someone else's as is, maybe I can act as if I could accept them as is. And when I can't accept myself as is, maybe I can act as if I could accept myself as is. And maybe as if will help me to get to as is, if I don't go nuts first. Incidentally, as is by itself is incomplete. I think about what another UU minister once said about the difference between mother love and father love. She said, a mother will love you as is. She loves you no matter what you do. Father love, she said, is more conditional. Your father will love you, but you have to earn it. You have to prove yourself a little. Now, I don't happen to agree that this is a mother versus father thing, but I do think there are two different kinds of love, and they're both necessary. I mean, you don't just want someone who loves you equally, whether you're good or bad, who's never disappointed no matter what you do, and who never stretches you, never challenges you to be a little better than you are. But you don't want someone who's always withholding their approval until you jump through just one more hoop and they never seem to run out of hoops. But rather than call it mother love or father love, I call it dog love and cat love. Your dog will love you no matter what you do, as long as you feed it. Your cat, on the other hand, will make you earn its love. But you know, you feel such a sense of accomplishment when it finally decides your lap is worthy of being its bed, that it's really worth it. And we need both kinds of love. I think, including from our congregation. Accept me as is, but challenge me to be more. give me peace and unrest. Or as I saw on a bumper sticker once, God loves you just the way you are, but too much to want you to stay that way. And if, like me, you're sometimes impatient with the time-consuming nature of getting from where you are to where you'd like to be, remember these words of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Everything of God's has a crack in it. If God isn't your word, might say everything worth having or seeing or doing has a crack in it. Or these words of Werner Erhard, if you could really accept that you weren't okay, you could stop trying to prove you were okay. If you could stop trying to prove you're okay, you could get that it was okay to not be okay. If you could get that it was okay not to be okay, you'd get that you were okay the way you are. You're okay. Get it? The last thing I want to say is that as hard as it is to believe, there are sometimes blessings in our blemishes and flowers in our flaws. Consider Alexander Fleming, the discoverer of penicillin. He was, as you may know, a Scottish researcher looking for an antibiotic drug to heal the infections like pneumonia, scarlet fever, and the many festering wounds that he had seen during World War I. Many of these wounds, of course, led to death because they had nothing to treat them with. Fleming happened to be looking at a couple of petri dishes in his lab on September 3rd, 1928, when he said, "That's funny. You see, the petri dishes had bacteria cultures in them, and Fleming noticed that the cultures were dying off. Apparently, a speck of dust had flown in and landed on one of the plates, since labs weren't all that sterile in those days, and the speck was a bit of mold, and that mold started killing the stuff around it. So Fleming called his discovery mold juice at first, but then he just determined that the spores were actually Penicillium notatum and called the juice penicillin. Later, other researchers were able to purify it, and together they got the Nobel Prize for this new miracle drug, which has saved millions of lives since then. What's interesting, though, is that this discovery was made possible by an unclean lab. Years later, Fleming happened to be touring a modern research laboratory, which was sterile and air-conditioned and dust-free, and he mentioned how different it was from the one that he had worked in. And his guide said, "Oh, what a pity you didn't have a place like this to work in. Who can tell what you might have discovered?" And Fleming said with a smile, "Well, not penicillin. It took an errant speck of dust in a somewhat contaminated laboratory to make a discovery like that possible." And I say, let that be a parable for us. It may be that our very flaws and the flaws of those we know carry within them some interesting possibilities and maybe even miracles. So I leave you with these closing words from myself. As we leave here today, let us remember that the beauty and holiness of life come in earthen vessels. We are like clay pots. We have rough edges. We are not always beautiful to look upon, and we have gaping cracks. To some, it would seem wiser that the treasure of life be stored in containers of silver and gold. But life's treasure is too dynamic to be stored at all. We, earthen vessels that we are, carry the beauty and holiness of life within us. For the treasure of life is love, and we are life's lovers.